The house was too quiet, a suffocating kind of silence that clung to the walls like damp air. Since the divorce, Grace had barely slept, her nights spent staring at the ceiling, chasing fragments of dreams that never came. The absence of her ex-husband's snores, the clatter of dishes, or even the hum of his late-night TV shows left a void she couldn't fill. She was 42, alone, and the weight of it pressed harder in the dark. Some nights she'd leave the radio on, letting soft jazz or talk shows breathe life into the emptiness. It wasn't enough, but it was something. She wasn't expecting Daniel, her 20-year-old son, to come home from college unannounced. When the front door creaked open that crisp October afternoon, her heart jolted. There he was, taller than she remembered, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his sandy hair messy from the drive. His hazel eyes carried that same gentle warmth she'd always known. But there was something new, maybe the way he stood more confident, or the faint stubble on his jaw. He smiled, and for the first time in weeks, Grace felt a flicker of lightness or mist. "You, Mom?" he said, dropping his duffel bag and pulling her into a hug. His arms lingered longer than usual, strong and steady, and she let herself sink into it, her cheek against his jacket, the scent of pine and laundry detergent grounding her. Daniel said he needed a break. Finals had drained him. His roommates were loud, and he craved home-cooked meals. Grace didn't question it. She was just glad he was there. The house felt alive again with his footsteps, his laughter, the way he'd sprawl on the couch with a textbook he barely read. They slipped into a rhythm effortlessly, her cooking dinner, him washing dishes, the two of them settling into the living room afterward. Sometimes they watched old comedies, Daniel's deep chuckle blending with her softer laughs. Other times they talked about nothing and everything, his classes, her long days at the accounting firm, the way the world felt heavier than it used. To Dot, Grace was careful to hide her loneliness, tucking it away like a crumpled receipt. Daniel had always been perceptive, his empathy a quiet strength, and she didn't want to burden him with her unraveling. But he saw through her. One evening, as she stood at the sink scrubbing the pan with mechanical precision, her mind adrift in a fog of exhaustion, Daniel came up behind her, his arms wrapped around her shoulders, a gentle, protective embrace. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice soft, laced with concern. Her throat tightened, a rush of warmth and shame flooding her. She nodded, unable to speak, her hands still in the soapy water. For a moment she wanted to lean back, to let his strength hold her up, but she pushed the urge down, blaming it on her frayed emotions. They were both tired, she told herself. That was all. Yet the moments kept piling up, small and undeniable. Daniel started complimenting her in ways that felt too intimate for a son. "You look beautiful today," he'd say when she wore a blouse that hugged her frame for work, his eyes lingering a beat too long. He teased her about the way she hummed while chopping vegetables, his grin playful but his gaze steady. One night, as they sat on the couch with a bottle of wine, he handed her a glass and said, "You work too hard, Mom. You should let yourself relax." His tone was casual, but his eyes were intense, searching. Grace's pulse quickened. She laughed it off, sipping the wine to hide the heat creeping up her neck. But his words stayed with her, circling her thoughts like a melody she couldn't shake. The shift was subtle at first, a warmth that blurred the edges of what should have been. Grace caught herself responding in ways that unsettled her. She'd check her reflection before joining him in the living room, smoothing her hair or adding a touch of lipstick. She started wearing perfume to bed, even though no one was there to notice. Stupid, she thought, scolding herself for the flutter in her chest when Daniel's hand brushed hers while passing a plate. She told herself she was imagining it, that her loneliness was twisting innocent gestures into something they weren't. But it didn't feel desperate. It felt easy, like stepping into a memory of being wanted. One night, Grace fell asleep early, the wine and exhaustion pulling her under. She woke in the dark, not fully, but enough to sense a shift. The mattress dipped, the faint sound of breathing that wasn't hers. Her eyes stayed closed, her body heavy with sleep, but her mind sparked, awake. Was it a dream? The warmth beside her felt real, a presence that stirred something deep and forgotten. A hand graced hers, not holding, just hovering, the heat of it electric. Her heart pounded, but she didn't move, didn't open her eyes. She told herself it was innocent, a memory of Daniel as a child crawling into her bed during a storm. But the air was thick with something else, something she couldn't name. The next morning, Daniel was in the kitchen pouring coffee, his smile as easy as ever. Grace said nothing, convincing herself she'd imagined it, though a part of her wondered if she wanted to believe she had. Daniel's gestures grew bolder, though never overt. He'd lean closer when they talked, his knee brushing hers on the couch. His hand would rest on the small of her back as he passed behind her in the kitchen. Touch so fleeting it could be dismissed, yet it left her breathless. Grace hated how it thrilled her, how she started to crave the spark of his attention. She wasn't proud of it, but she couldn't stop. The house, once a tomb of silence, now hummed with attention that both terrified and exhilarated her. One evening, she woke from a nap to that same sensation, the bed shift, the quiet rhythm of breath. Her eyes stayed closed, her body still, but her heart raced. A hand brushed hers again, lingering this time, not gripping, just present. She could have moved, could have spoken, but she didn't. She lay there, pulse hammering, her mind grappling for meaning. Was it comfort? Was it something more? When she woke the next morning, the light was off, the door closed, her bed empty, but the memory of that touch burned. And with it, the realization that she hadn't pulled away. The silence between them changed after that. It wasn't cold or awkward. It was heavy, charged with unspoken truths. Daniel still smiled, still helped with chores, but there was a softness in his voice, a tenderness that felt too intimate. Grace noticed how he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, his eyes curious, steady. Not the way a son looks at his mother. She tried to dismiss it, to convince herself she was misreading his kindness. But the truth was undeniable when he said, "You don't need anyone else to see how beautiful you are." The words hit her like a wave, unlocking something she'd buried. She smiled weakly, retreating to the kitchen, but inside she felt alive, in a way she hadn't in years. Daniel started staying home more, ignoring his friends' calls to spend evenings with her. They'd talk for hours, his dreams mingling with her regrets, their laughter filling the house. The space between them shrank, and neither seemed eager to widen it. One night, he confessed he'd never felt safe opening up to anyone but her. His voice cracked, raw with vulnerability, and Grace's eyes stung. "I'm glad you trust me," she said, her voice trembling with something she couldn't name. Their eyes met, and the silence that followed was louder than words. The tension built through small acts: Daniel fixing a shelf, bringing her a coffee, Grace cooking his favorite meals. It wasn't lust, not exactly, but a quiet recognition of a void they'd filled in each other. Grace stopped inviting neighbors over, as if they might sense the shift through the walls. To her, it felt natural, like they belonged to each other, in a way no one else could understand. One night, as she brushed her hair before bed, Daniel sat on her bed watching in silence. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then said, "I wish I could take all your hurt away." The words pierced her, and when he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, her breath caught. The room felt suspended, her heart a wild drumbeat. His eyes held no guilt, only care, and something deeper. Desire, yes, but also a love that didn't feel wrong, even if it should have. She didn't move, didn't stop him. And when their eyes locked, she saw herself reflected, soft, worthy, alive. That night, Grace lay awake, torn between guilt and yearning. She'd been numb for so long, starved of touch, of being seen. Daniel saw her, all of her, and the thought of pushing him away felt like losing herself again. The next night, he knocked on her door, his eyes red, his voice shaky. "Nightmare," he said, and she let him in without question. They sat in silence until he spoke, his words raw. "I don't think I'll ever find someone who sees me like you do." Her chest tightened, and when his hand reached for hers, she let him hold it, her fingers curling into his. It was comfort, she told herself, but her body knew better. When he leaned closer, his breath warm on her skin, she didn't pull away. His kiss was hesitant, trembling, and she kissed him back slow and gentle, like waking him from a long, cold sleep. They didn't go further, but they held each other until dawn, his head on her shoulder, his fingers tracing her hand. Grace memorized every second, even as guilt clawed at her. Morning brought clarity and shame. She slipped away while he slept, standing in the hallway, her mind screaming. Who had she become? In the kitchen, Daniel acted as if nothing had changed, pouring her coffee with that same soft smile. But everything had. She couldn't meet his eyes, her hands trembling around the mug. She tried to pull back, to create distance. But the absence of his warmth was worse than the guilt. Every quiet dinner felt lonelier than before, and she caught herself longing for his footsteps. Daniel noticed her withdrawal and gave her space, his restraint making her ache more. One morning, she asked if he was okay. He smiled. "Tired. Just tired," he said. But she knew better. He started going out, reconnecting with friends, spending nights away. Grace waited up, hating how it made her feel reckless, fragile, alive. When he finally sat her down, his voice was steady, but his eyes were heavy. He was going back to campus early, moving into a new place. "I don't want to make things harder," he said. "Being close, it's messing with us." She nodded, her throat tight, and told him she wanted him to be happy. It was the truth, even if it broke her. The night before he left, they stayed in their separate rooms, the silence numb. Then he knocked. Just once. She opened the door, and he held her long and tied a goodbye that said everything they couldn't. When he left the next morning, his footsteps fading down the driveway, Grace collapsed, tears finally coming. The guilt didn't consume her as she'd expected. What lingered was longing for the touch, the comfort, the version of herself she found in his eyes. Months passed, and Daniel didn't call. He didn't block her, didn't vanish. He just let distance erase what they'd done. Grace tried dating, tried pretending it was a mistake she'd moved past. But no one saw her like he did. She knew how it sounded, knew what people would say, but they hadn't lived it. They hadn't felt the silence he filled, the way his presence mended her broken pieces. She didn't regret the kiss, the night, the goodbye. She regretted needing it but not feeling it. Some nights she still woke, reaching for warmth that wasn't there, mourning not just Daniel, but the woman she'd been with him, seen, wanted, alive. If you were moved by Grace and Daniel's story, dive deeper into the complexities of human connection with more tales like this. Subscribe to our channel Broken Vows for stories that explore the heart's unspoken truths. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more.